Hello, everyone. Welcome to a book-based interview where today we talk to author and animator Bob Miller. Bob has been present in the animation industry for years, having experience in all forms of animation and gaining the opportunity to showcase his skills in popular shows and movies such as The Simpsons, Scooby-Doo, Courage the Cowardly Dog, and Space Jam. If at any point you are interested in following Bob's journey, feel free to check out this interview as well as the other links that we're going to have posted in the description. Also, if you enjoy this type of content from us, please feel free to like and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Bob, thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I just want to say that Bob is the author of the unofficial Batman, the animated interviews. And I'm a huge fan of Batman the Animated Series, so I can't wait to talk about that soon. But just to start, if you could just let us know what initially drew you into animation.
Well, I never expected to get into animation. Mine was a very bizarre journey. But for a takeaway from your viewers, write what you're passionate about. If you're going to be a writer, write what you're passionate about. And at the time my career began, I was in Texas, and what I was passionate about was animation. I was passionate about Star Wars and various other things. And when those works were published, beginning with Comics Buyer's Guide, I started connecting with people who shared my interests and hired me because of what they saw. For instance, I wrote about Hanna-Barbera's 35th anniversary at the time, and I illustrated that article too. It was for a magazine called Animato. And in that particular issue, Harry McCracken, the editor, had interviewed John Crispolucci. You know who that is, right?
Could you please let the people watching know, actually, Bob?
Okay, well, he gained notoriety for being the supervising director for Ralph Bakshi's Mighty Mouse: The New Adventures on CBS.
Got it. Yes.
And then he left that series to do a season of being the New Adventures of Beanie and Cecil.
Okay.
So, but after that, he became known as the creator of Ren and Stimpy.
Yep. Okay.
That was John. So anyway, John had illustrated that issue of Animato, and he even illustrated the cover, front and back cover. And that interview was in my article talking about Hanna-Barbera, which I illustrated. And John saw that, and he said, "Oh, he can draw the early Hanna-Barbera style." And so that was Dick Bickenbach and Ed Benedict from the classic characters that are now running on MeTV Toons: Huckleberry Hound, Yogi Bear, Peter Potamus, you know. And so I wrote about it was called Growing Up with Yogi Bear, and sharing my research about that. John saw I could, he saw my passion. Two, he saw that I could draw those characters very well because he liked that style, that early Hanna-Barbera style. So he took a chance on me, and he hired me out of Texas. He was gearing up for Beanie and Cecil. And he wanted fresh talent that he could mold into his style. So he hired me for that. I mean, see, that's why I called my transition bizarre, because stuff like this doesn't happen really in real life. Maybe fairy tales, but so I took a chance on him, and he took a chance on me. I moved out of Texas and went to Glendale, California, and started training on the job as a layout artist. And so I started learning that way. But I never in my life expected to be involved in animation. He just had faith that I could do what he needed me to do.
Wow. And did you feel nervous making that big move, like moving out, taking a chance, or did you feel pretty confident in, this is my passion, I'm really excited? Like, what was the balance of risk and kind of just excitement?
Well, the risk was for him as well as me, because I was an unproven talent. I had minor experience in animation when at the University of Texas in Austin. I took a course. That was the extent of it.
Okay.
But I wrote about animation, and I could draw. And like I said, he saw that I was knowledgeable about the art form, and that I could draw the characters to his liking. And he wanted that style for the new Beanie and Cecil show. So, yeah, I was nervous, honestly, I moved out here. I'm in Burbank now, by the way, but I moved out here first time on my own, and it was intimidating, because I really knew next to nothing about actual animation production. I could tell
Right.
about the history of animation,
Right.
but actual production, hands-on experience, well, being a layout artist on the show gave me my first dive into the deep end.
Okay. Okay. So let me ask you this then. What was your favorite thing in the industry that like you learned about just kind of the animation industry in terms of, character animation or some type of storyboard or special effects, or what's something that you learned from the industry that really you gravitated towards that before you didn't really know about?
Well, I liked animation in general,
Right.
and I caught on to how it was done. After being in Cecil, I trained at Sullivan Bluth, which is Don Bluth's studio. He had a unit in Ireland and he had a unit in Burbank. So I learned classical animation, starting out as an in-betweener and became an assistant animator. And I started meeting people that would help me throughout my career. And that's how you succeed in animation is you start to you network. You meet people, you make friends with them. They can see what you do. They can see your passion, and then they'll remember you as you move on. I mean, animation is like you're like animators are like a bunch of vagabonds. The project ends, then you go on to another studio. And sometimes you see your friends there, sometimes not. Sometimes you get referrals. I'm indebted to Michel Gagne, who you may know is a special effects animator. You've heard of him, right?
Would you please be able to tell the audience, just in case?
Okay. Well, Michel is well, he's done many things, but he, as an effects animator, hired me on several projects after we left Blue. He hired me on Swan Princess, and I was an effects
Okay.
animator on that.
Wow. Okay.
And that and the Quest for Camelot at Warner Brothers. And based on my special effects background, I also served on Space Camp. But he was working on Quest for Camelot at the time, and then I later joined him on that project. So, see, the thing to be successful in the field of animation, you have to constantly learn.
Right.
You have to constantly. I mean, I was a assistant animator, and I learned how to do storyboards on Garfield and Friends. Then on Itsy Bitsy Spider over at Hyperion Studios, and I would keep gaining experience and learning to apply these different disciplines. Like as an effects animator, you have a water splash. If you've ever studied it, you have the splash, the primary splash, and then the secondary splash where it doesn't go up as high, and sometimes even a third. And I would apply that knowledge when I would do my storyboards, because I knew that's how water behaved. And so I'd apply the effects knowledge to the storyboards that I would do. So they're all intertwined, all these
Cool.
disciplines.
Cool. So then, what inspired you to become an author then? Because that's a little different.
Well, I've always been a writer, starting with the Comics Buyer's Guide and Films Collector's World. And again, this is going to dovetail into Batman in a little bit. But
Yeah,
my
I'm going
first
there.
major article was interviewing Paul Dini. Paul Dini, at the time, was the story editor and writer for Ewoks and Droids for Lucasfilm.
No way.
Okay, so so nobody was writing about that show, and I thought, well, if nobody's going to do it, why don't I do it? And so I got a hold of Paul, and he agreed to the interview. We did the interview, and I submitted it to Starlog magazine. David McDonald was the editor, and he later published it in Comic Scene, but that's where I first met Paul. And lo and behold, Paul became the story editor of that Beanie and Cecil show that I worked on.
Wow. Okay.
It was a small industry, that was later on, like a year or two later. And then Paul and I became friends. So when Batman started, and so wait, so I always wrote for Starlog after that point. I was assigned to do an article on Garfield and Friends and Beanie and Cecil even before I started working on them. I didn't work on those until later. Um, and then the editor was pleased enough to keep assigning me these articles. I wrote the cover story for Tiny Toon Adventures, where I interviewed the key people involved with Tiny Toons. That was a cover story for Comics Inc. And David was pleased enough to hire me again. I was moonlighting. As I was working in animation, I was also moonlighting as a writer. And so I would interview people and learn from them, the people I interviewed. So I knew what was going on in the industry rather than being cloistered in one studio. I would
Right.
learn my craft, how things worked. So everything dovetailed. And then finally, Batman the Animated Series came around, and I knew Paul. Paul was brought on as a story editor shortly before the first team was let go because it didn't match the vision of Bruce Timm and Eric Radomski. So Paul was brought in. Alan Burnett came in from DuckTales, and they started writing stories that had what Eric Radomski and Bruce Timm wanted. And by the way, I first met Bruce Timm on Beanie and Cecil. Bruce Timm had worked with John Chris Falusi on Mighty Mouse: The New Adventures, and that Bruce said was formulating his and solidified his design style was learning from John Chris Falusi. Bruce briefly spent some time on Beanie and Cecil, and then he went to Warner Brothers where he worked on Tiny Toons. And he and Eric Radomski, there was a call from Gene McCurdy to the crew working on Tiny Toons. Hey, we're interested in developing a Batman cartoon. And by that time, the 1989 Batman movie by Tim Burton had come out. It gave Warner Brothers lots and lots of money to play with. And they say, well, we're going to do a sequel, Batman Returns. How else can we capitalize it? Oh, let's do a cartoon. And that way people can buy the toys based on both franchises. So Batman Returns and Batman the Animated Series was coming out at near close to the same time. So Paul, thanks to my friendship with Paul, I got to see On Leather Wings, the pilot, as well as Heart of Ice that Paul had also written. So I was privileged. And finally, what had happened was that in animation up to that time, it was like Super Friends. And the stories were awful. The acting was awful, the voice acting. It was treated as children's medium, children's cartoons. And the people who were making Batman the Animated Series had a more adult approach.
Yes, yes. I saw a documentary about it actually, and I just want to show this in the interview, but I even have like these little pins right here. Like I grew up on Batman the Animated Series, so when I met you at the Festival of Books, it probably showed, but I was super excited to just talk to you. Yes, please keep going. And one thing I'll just add real quick, just to continue this story and stuff. I know that on your website, because I'm gonna kind of segue into your book for the unofficial Batman the Animated Interviews, it says that it took you over 30 years to complete the series. So I just want to ask, like, what was that journey like? And if you could just tell us a little bit more and just some insight on that, because that's incredible. I'm really excited to hear about Batman.
Well, again, it was like a 1 in a million situation because I came to know the people making Batman the Animated Series already knew Paul Dini.
Right.
And so David McDowell started assigning me articles to cover that show while it was in production. So I talked to Bruce Timm. I talked to Eric Radomski, who established the style. I talked to Kevin Altieri, one of the directors. I talked to Kevin Conroy, who many regard as the definitive voice of Batman and Bruce Wayne.
Yes.
So
yes.
I talked to them all while the show was in production, and of course I also talked to Paul Dini at the time. I interviewed him several times throughout the course of the series over the years. So I thought after a while there's enough material here to start a book sometime, you know. And so I kept going into situations where I would gather more and more and more material. ASIFA Hollywood, the Burbank unit of the International Animated Film Society, had a series called An Evening With. So I asked Paul and Alan Burnett on separate nights to share their experiences on making Batman and Batman Beyond and Justice League, you know, and whatever other shows they were working on to share their experiences. Okay, so I got more material there for a book. And then also at Comic Con San Diego, um, Paul Dini's girlfriend, I met her in the hall with Paul, and she wanted me to come with them to the concourse where they had like 20 girls dressed as Harley Quinn. And Paul was immediately touched. I took photos of that, and you'll see them in one of the books, one of the volumes. But how propitious of me to be at the right place at the right time, you know. And so decades passed, literally decades passed, and I thought, well, why don't I go ahead and ask the rest of the cast and the artists and the executives involved in making the show, because it had proven beyond a shadow of a doubt how popular it was.
Yeah.
And also, I wanted to pay tribute to these guys. What made the show successful? What did they do to make it so successful? And I had all these other questions. And I had to do it quickly while most were still alive. One story I found out during my research was that on the DVD commentary for Batman Beyond, they needed to crew up for Batman Beyond. And Bruce Timm was remarking that a lot of the people that were applying for Batman Beyond had never heard of Jack Kirby.
Oh,
do you know who Jack Kirby is?
That one, yes. But can you? Yes.
Jack Kirby is called the King of Comics. He's responsible for creating or co-creating Captain America, the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, Iron Man, Thor,
Wow.
And all these other Marvel Comics characters. And his style was strongly influential for those involved in the animation industry, including Bruce Timm.
Okay.
Strong influence for Bruce Timm. And so they were appalled that these new kids coming in, they never heard of Jack Kirby. So
that's wild.
They had to educate him. They gave him some comics that Kirby drew to get him up to speed, because that was a key factor in the design of the Batman Beyond, the Justice League and Justice League Unlimited, that kind of thing. So they need to get him up to speed real quick. So so I didn't want that to happen to the people who made Batman the Animated Series. How are people going to know how the show was made unless somebody writes about it and interviews the people directly in their words, what they thought of it, what challenges they had to go through.
Wow.
How tough it was, and it was tough. So how did they meet the challenges? So I had to get this down in this what became a series of books. I talked to somebody, and they would say, "Oh, you got to talk to so and so. Oh, you got to talk to so and so." And so I had a lot of help from the people I interviewed. They sent me to the right people to talk to.
Yeah, because you could have just been there at the right time, absorbed all that information and those experiences, but there was something that got you to maybe feel a responsibility to document and share that through a book. So what is it then that really drove you to continue and not just kind of experience it for yourself, but you saw a greater... Was it that experience of the, young animators coming in and just kind of not really knowing, like with Jack Kirby, and you kind of just thinking, I want to share this? Or what is it that kept you motivated and driven then to pursue sharing this information?
Well, I've always been an animation historian. Okay. I've always written about other shows.
Right.
Other than Batman. And I know how volatile the animation industry can be, in that it goes through phases. And so before Batman the Animated Series, Saturday morning had been watered down for kids, just barely watchable for anybody who had any sense of intelligence, you know. So when Batman came around, it was a groundbreaker, and it showed you can have angst, and you can have heavy action, and you have characters that are expanded beyond the costume. They have personalities and wit, genuine wit. And again, that's credited to the people who made the show. And I wanted these books were meant to pay tribute to that and to preserve that for other animated shows.
Right, right. Yeah, I watched it with my mom as a kid, and she watched it. She enjoyed it. It was I was so involved in that world. So, and even in like documentaries that I've watched and the research that I've done, I got the sense that it was kind of an animated world of just kind of dumbing down just what you just said, where it's just like really, like as if they don't have brains or something. Like this is just meant for rocks or something. But there was some depth. There was some depth to Batman the Animated Series that, as a child, I picked up on immediately. And then my mom, she could turn it on and kind of be like, yeah, like watch Batman. But she sat down and she was invested in the characters and the stories and the arcs, and it was so fascinating. It 100% shaped my childhood. And so I just want to thank you for documenting it, for having involvement and being able to just be a part of that creative process and talking to those involved. I think it's so fascinating and so insightful that you are kind of like this historian for animation and archiving everything. So personally, I just want to thank you, Bob Miller. But
Well,
yeah,
thank you.
seriously. But
Appreciate it, Elias. Thank you very much.
thank you.
Yeah, no, I also want to thank you as well, Bob. And I personally am not, I never grew up watching the animated Batman show, but one animation show that really did help me, as a kid, just like develop and just learn a lot more about what life had was Avatar: The Last Airbender. That was
Hmm.
made by Nickelodeon Studios. I actually saw a live orchestra for the show, live in concert, where the creators came out and they talked about how they never expected this to be big. But 15 years later, the kids that watched it are now adults with their kids that are watching the show. And it's such a beautiful thing because I think there was a time where nobody would think that animation would have such a strong impact the way that other forms of media have. And when you see shows like Batman and Avatar: The Last Airbender, it's so. I remember when I was a kid, people would tell me, ask me like, "What's my favorite show?" I would say Avatar, and they're like, "The cartoon." And I just think when they say that, like the line, the cartoon, it just dumbs down just the beauty of what animation is. Like, it's not just a cartoon. It's not just a moving picture that just says a bunch of nonsense. Like, there's emotions, there's growth, there's lessons that, kids grow up learning and they practice, I'm pretty sure as they grow up. I'm not saying that there's kids out there trying to fight crime, trying to be Batman, but I do think that when you watch someone like that on the screen, it doesn't matter if they're real. You do start to understand, like, wow, like, what are the consequences of being a good person? Oh, sometimes you have to make sacrifices. Oh, what's it like, having to be there for the ones you care about? Well, sometimes you might have times where you might be by yourself. And that's why I think not only is Batman an amazing character, but that's why this animation show is such an amazing show because it introduces complex ideas to a younger audience without making it be like, hey, you need to take some notes. It's digestible. And I think that's the beauty of animation. And not only do I want to thank you, but I also want to lead into our next question. And I know you mentioned this in the beginning when you said that, for people that want to get into animation, write what you're passionate about. But do you have any other advice that you want to give to people, especially in this new generation where there's things like AI and there's so much technology out there in the world? Do you have any advice for somebody that would want to get started in the animation industry today, but they probably don't know where to start?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer because everything's in a flux right now, partially because of AI, but partially because of the studio mindset that's happening right now. For instance, I'll let you draw your own conclusion from this, but last year you had Kung Fu Panda #4, you had Despicable Me #4, you had Inside Out #2, and several other movies, animated films that did extraordinarily well at the box office. Yet, the crews that made those shows were dismissed. Yeah, the studios could afford to keep them on and keep them working, but they had had huge layoffs. So right now, I'm told that the Animation Guild in Hollywood has about 7,000 members, and only 80% are unemployed. So the job market is
Wow.
very tight. And what do you think is going to happen when AI really kicks in? So you got to ask yourself, as one who may want to enter the industry, you may want to ask the question, well, do I want to work for other studios, or do I want to work for me? Do I want to be a storyteller? In which case, well, if the answer to that is yes, then why animation? Why not write and develop your own property, your own stories? If you can't draw, then write. If you can't write but can draw, then ally yourself with somebody who can and produce your own what IP or intellectual property. And in my case, I'm developing an IP that I've actually been hiring people to work on. People have been laid off, even though they've had years of experience at Disney or at Bluth or wherever. They're they're available, and so I'm going to exploit that. I'm going to say, "Hey, would you like to work on my story?" And I'm a believer in that story. Um, so I'm in a position financially to actually hire them. And that way, I don't have to worry about other studios micromanaging. This is my property. You're not going to micromanage it. You're not going to ruin it. And I'm in control of this. So you might want to explore if you're wanting to be a storyteller, you might want to explore the children's book market first, or comic books. And right now, graphic novels are extremely popular. There is a demand for graphic novels. So I would say right now, explore your own path, explore your own storytelling, and do it that way. Now, that's what happened to me. When I got my start, somebody saw that I was talented enough to draw Hanna-Barbera characters. And I segued, somebody hired me into animation because of that. Now, it can happen to you if you draw something and, drew a graphic novel and somebody sees your talent, they may want to hire you because of that. So that's the thing for people today is draw your own works, write your own works, and that will show to people with bigger pockets whether or not they would want to hire you. That is, if you want to work with them. That's the question. You're taking a chance that the people who hire you will know what they're doing. You know what I mean? But if
Yeah.
you develop your own stuff, then you own it. Nobody controls you. You can raise money through a Kickstarter or your family, um, or whatever. And if you want to be that free with your expression, then go for it. That's what I would suggest. And also build a website. That's how people can get out there. I entered the industry without the internet, without a website. I was found because John Cristofalusi, by coincidence, illustrated and was interviewed in a magazine that I participated in by sheer coincidence, you know.
Wow.
So increase your odds, get a website up, show your portfolio on there, and it's up to you if you want to try to work for other studios. And you've got to, of course, study the hardware and the software involved in, if the studios want you, then you've got to be facile in Storyboard Pro or Maya or Unreal Engine. And you've got to take the training in doing those if that's what you want to do.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it's kind of a double-edged sword at the time that we live in because, well, not double-edged, so maybe that's not the right way, but it's like one thing that you mentioned is that, we're in a flux, and I definitely agree with what you're saying. that I think this is something that Elias and I talked about with the Wild Robot, with DreamWorks, I believe, where that was the last movie where the studio had like a at-home team to animate the movie before they decided to make the change to I don't want to put words in, but at least it was outsourcing, right? Like they decided to
Yeah, they were
outsource
out.
the talent.
Yeah,
Yeah,
offshoring. Yeah,
and
outsourcing.
that was a really big for me personally, that's such a big hit because I think it's great that we have studios that are at home trying to like cultivate home talent of just people that are local just trying to make something instead of always trying to find a cheaper price margin or trying to just find something where you can make an easy price cut. But at the same time, you also bring up the ability where individuals can now be more independent because there's more access to technology, there's more access to understanding what the skills that you can learn through the internet, website development, and even the ability to network. And I think that's amazing because I think it's always during moments when the industry is in a flux like this where you really start seeing some really creative outlets start coming out. Because whenever there's a problem, I feel like if you really care about the craft, the solution will naturally come to you. And I really appreciate how you're really open about the idea where, if you really care about something, that's really the big green light for you to go for it. And I feel like a lot of people, when it comes to like specific industries, especially like animation, I feel like a lot of people might be scared because they're probably thinking like, wow, like I don't know if this is something for me. I don't know if I'm gonna be the best animator. I don't know if I can draw the best, but I really have this idea and I really believe in it. And I feel like, following your advice, it's like maybe that's enough. Maybe you don't need to focus too much on being a mastermind before you do something. I think it's better if you just do something and then later on you learn exactly what you need to fill in the blanks with and then you end up creating what you want to create. And yeah, I really appreciate that, Bob. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Well, there's a couple other points I'd like to share. Two success stories.
Sure.
One is Betty, Birney. She created a series called The World According to Humphrey. It's a classroom hamster who's taken home by the school kids, and the hamster gets out of his cage at night and somehow solves the kids' problems. And she's gotten at least 12 books of that character, but she started out working in publicity at Disneyland. And then she went on to become the story editor of Welcome to the Corner and Dumbo Circus. When cable was starting up, they needed product. The networks needed shows, and she was the story editor for those two shows. Those were puppet shows. Then she later created to Disney's DuckTales and some other Disney products. And she realized, well, wait a minute, this is work for hire. I'm not profiting from this, you know. And so she left the
Right.
animation industry to work on her own material where she would profit from her own talent. And it took her about 9 years to actually come up with a concept that people glommed onto, and that was The World According to Humphrey. And see, that's the challenge is finding a character who's well liked enough for people to say, "Hey, I want to spend time with this character. I want to spend time reading about him or watching him." That's the trick is coming up with a concept that's so appealing that yeah, I'll spend my money buying this character's stories. The other thing is, and this will be for your older viewers, Lee Child is the writer for the Jack Reacher novels, you know, and Reacher was a bestseller from book one. And Lee Child's advice is that if you're in your 50s, that's a great time to start writing because you've developed enough life experience to be able to share that life experience and put it into your stories and make them seem more authentic and more that people can relate to when they read about Jack Reacher or all these other characters that Reacher comes around for. So it's never you're never too old to start writing your own stories. How his very first novel became an instant bestseller, I don't know, but he had gained enough experience to learn how to do that, to know how to do it, and so that's why Reacher became so popular. I think it's up to about maybe 28 stories, 28 novels now, something like
Wow.
that. So that's what happens when you go out on your own. It's risky, but it can be very rewarding. You just got to believe in yourself. You have to educate yourself. You have to network. You have to make connections with people who can help you, and join organizations like if you're into children's book writing, Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, SCBWI. Go to them. Join the Writers Guild, and they can help with contracts. And let's see, for Hollywood, you can uh, go to online screenings with them, learn from that organization if you're really into animation. And there's other venues too. So that's my advice.
Thank you so much. I think this has been such a great, flow of events where we start off by talking about, what got you into animation, and it takes us all the way through to how we, like the next generation of animators, the next generation of people that are just as passionate as you once were when you were younger, and you still are, can follow that route, and they can follow that belief that, hey, if I see something that I believe in and I care about, that's all that matters.
Mhm.
And we're approaching our last question, and this is something that I love asking because this has to relate with book base and our a want to connect people through literature and books. But I just wanted to ask, what do you think is important about socializing around books? And were you ever part of a book club, or were you ever engaged with reading with other people when you were at any point in your life?
Well, as a member of SCBWI, one of the advantages is that you can go to conventions and connect with editors and agents and learn your craft. And one of the benefits is that you can develop local critique groups or join local critique groups, and you can have your work read out loud, say on a monthly basis. And you get criticism, and you'll learn what works and what doesn't work. So joining SCBWI is a helpful experience in networking and getting feedback before your work is published, because you need to polish it up as much as you can before even submitting to an agent.
Wow, that's crazy. That's one thing that I think is really interesting is that I don't think a lot of people talk about connecting at conventions. Because Elliot and I have been to some conventions, but we go as consumers. Like our whole thing is we want to meet our stars, we want to meet our people, and we want to take pictures, get autographs, and leave. But I never thought about the other aspect of conventions where you might actually just end up going there and meeting people that are in a similar phase of life that also want to create something, and then from there you can socialize and interact with people about, hey, like, what are you working on, and maybe if you can share ideas in a safe space, you might get more advice, or you might even get more passion to be like, hey, I met somebody that's also doing their own craft. I think I want to go ahead and push mine to the next limit. So I think that's really great how you even brought up the idea that unconventional ways of meeting people doesn't mean that it's weird. It's like that's just how it is. And I think for animation, going to conventions is like the biggest thing, I feel like, because you're meeting so many people that are fans as much as they are creators. And I think when you're in a space like that, I think that's where the magic happens. Like that's just amazing.
Well,
And
the thing to keep in
yeah,
mind is when you meet these people who could help you, you go with the attitude, it's not what you can do for me, it's what I can do for you.
right.
Present yourself as selfless and willing to help them, and be grateful. Be grateful to them when they do help you.
Right, absolutely. And you definitely sounded like John F. Kennedy when you were saying that line. I was like, dang, that was that was a nice mom. No, I agree. I agree because it's a relationship. It's not just a one-sided thing where you're just trying to grab something from someone. You also want to give. And I think that's how you create such a healthy environment within the industry where if you want to cultivate creativity and promote the idea that passion and love comes first, it has to be like that, where you have to be willing to give and also be willing to take, but in a sense where it's like, it's out of care for the craft. It's not, hey, I want to get a job, I'm trying to make money, I gotta do this, gotta do that. It's like, hey, I care about this. Do you want to like talk about it? Do you want to work on it? And I know this, but you know that. Let's work on this. Or hey, you have advice, and I have advice on this. Let's share contact information or just ideas. And I think that's such a beautiful way to end this, this interview, because I really want the greatest takeaway to be that number one, anything's possible, and just as much as you've been able to experience so much success in your life, I feel like if anybody watches this and they look at you, Bob, and they go, "Wow, like this is such an amazing person. I want to do whatever Bob did." It's not like that opportunity is never going to be out there. It's just going to take work and it's going to take time. But I think anything that's rewarding in life has to come at the cost of it taking time and taking energy. And I really appreciate your honesty and just telling us that, hey, there are moments where it was hard and there were moments where it was random, but your ability to just take all the skill sets that you gained through your life and combine it into where you are now. It's honestly an honor to have you here to talk to you about, everything that you've done, especially with this with the anthology series of the Batman interviews. So, I know Elias is gonna say it again, but I just want to say thank you. Like it really means a lot,
Okay.
Bob, for you being here.
Well, Nathan, that's very kind of you to say, and you too, Elias. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, and we'll close this out next time on BookBase.